Welcome back to the Shutter Sports Refresh, the weekly show that breaks down all of the biggest news in sports for you. I'm your host, Lucky Roberts, and let's get right into it. As of last night, the NFL regular season is over. That's right, the playoffs are upon us, and things are about to get really exciting. Before we get into playoff matchups, let's break down some of the biggest games from last night. While a lot of teams decided to rest their starters, some teams were playing for something. The Miami Dolphins were one of them. They played in a must-win game against the New York Jets last night as they clung on to hopes that they could sneak into the playoff spot. Fortunately for them, their star quarterback Tua Tagovailoa is incredibly injury-prone and had to sit this game out due to some issues with his hip. This cost the Dolphins, and they ended up losing to the Jets and losing their playoff hopes. While the Dolphins didn't quite grab a playoff spot, two other teams did last night, the Denver Broncos and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Broncos had it out easy as they were up against the backup players of the Kansas City Chiefs. They took the win easily, 38-0, snagging the last playoff spot in the AFC. The Buccaneers had a slightly more difficult matchup going against the New Orleans Saints. Thanks to some solid play from their wide receiver Mike Evans and their running back Bucky Irving, the Buccaneers won this game 27-19 and secured their playoff spot. The biggest matchup of the night was between the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings for the first seed in the NFC. Both teams were 14-2 coming into this game, and when it came down to it, the Vikings quarterback Sam Darnold had to step up the most, but he didn't. And behind running back Jahmyr Gibbs, the Detroit Lions handily took the win and a bye into the second round. This officially makes the Vikings the best wildcard team in the history of football with a final record of 14-3. Now let's get into the playoff matchups and the schedule. The first games start this Saturday with the LA Chargers playing the Houston Texans. The Baltimore Ravens play their division rival Pittsburgh Steelers on Saturday as well. On Sunday, the Buffalo Bills take on the Denver Broncos, and the Kansas City Chiefs get a bye into the second round. That was all in the AFC. Let's move on to the NFC. As we mentioned earlier, the Detroit Lions are going to bye into the second round. It leaves on Sunday the Green Bay Packers to take on the Philadelphia Eagles. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers will also take on the Washington Commanders that day. On Monday, the last matchup will be the Minnesota Vikings and the LA Rams. It's bound to be a thrilling first round, so come back next week to see what happens. Staying on the topic of football playoffs, college football is also in the middle of its playoffs, and it has its second round this week. The first matchup was the Fiesta Bowl versus Penn State and Boise State. The runner-up for the Heisman Award for MVP of college football, Ashton Jeanty, gave his best efforts to give Boise State the win over Penn State, but Penn State ended up taking the win in this one 31-14 pretty easily. Next up was the Peach Bowl between Texas and Arizona State, and boy was this a game to remember. The game ended up in overtime after a back and forth game. The Texans found themselves down 7 in overtime and 13 yards away from a first down with only 1 down remaining. With the season on the line, Texas quarterback Quinn Ewers throws a pass from nearly 40 yards out that falls right into the hands of Matthew Golden to keep them alive. The Longhorns took over in second overtime, eventually taking home the game 39-31. What a game. The other two playoff games weren't as exciting. In the Sugar Bowl, Notre Dame took down Georgia 23-10, and in the Rose Bowl, it was Ohio State taking down number 1 seeded Oregon 41-21 in a surprise upset. The semifinals are now set with Notre Dame and Penn State playing in the Orange Bowl, and Ohio State and Texas playing in the Cotton Bowl. Those games go down this Thursday and Friday, so come back to see what happens. That was a lot of football talk, so let's quickly brush over all the other major sports before this episode comes to an end. In the NBA, the Cleveland Cavaliers are the best team in the Eastern Conference and the league with a ridiculous record of 31-4. The Oklahoma City Thunder lead the Western Conference with a record of 30-5 right behind them. The Thunder had an incredibly impressive 15-game win streak currently since losing the NBA Cup Finals. The second team in the East is former champion Boston Celtics, and the second in the West is surprisingly the Houston Rockets. Moving on to the NHL now, the Toronto Maple Leafs have won 4 straight and taking control of the Atlantic Division over the Florida Panthers. The New Jersey Devils have done the opposite, losing 4 straight and also losing the top spot in the Metropolitan Division to the Washington Capitals. In the Central Division, it's still the Winnipeg Jets, but the gap between them and the Minnesota Wild is certainly close. Just one game could change the standings. And finally, in the Pacific Division, it's the Vegas Golden Knights who have consistently been the top team. Moving on to women's hockey in the PWHL, the top spot is tied between the reigning champions Minnesota Frost and Victoire du Montreal. The race is close between the top 4 though. It's really still anybody's game. Finally, let's get on to some soccer standings. In the Premier League, the top 4 is Liverpool, Arsenal, Nottingham Forest, and Chelsea. And this has stayed the same since last week. In Serie A, Napoli, Atalanta, Inter, Lazio make up the top 4. Inter especially has been on a hot streak and could be looking to move up in the standings. In Bundesliga, Bayern, Leverkusen, Frankfurt, and Leipzig are all in the top 4. In La Liga in Spain, Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid are both ahead of Barcelona now, as Barcelona has just gone 1-3-1 in their last 5 games. Fourth, just below Barcelona, is Athletic Club Bilbao. And finally in Ligue 1, PSG is still in first. Marseille, Monaco, and Lille take up the other 3 spots in the top 4. And that's it for this week's Shutter Sports Refresh. Make sure to tune in next week for more updates. I've been your host, Lucky Roberts, and you can check me and the rest of the team out down below here on social media. Thanks for watching.